Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session and the opening of the work stream under the Just Transition platform that is specifically dedicated to just transition in coal, peat, and oil shale regions in the EU. My name is Hans van Steen. I'm a principal advisor here in the European Commission, DG Energy, and I will be the moderator of this session here today. Before we kick off with the session, let me just give you a couple of technical information. First of all, we have simultaneously interpretation of the meeting for English and Polish. The interpretation will be provided via the Interactio app. If not already done, you will follow the guidance provided of the dedicated session webpage on Swapcard. Once you have downloaded the app, you can plug in your headphones, you can open the app and introduce the event code, which is the one indicated here, JTP 2022, and select the language channel. Please make sure to mute the sound coming from Swapcard if you use this. And I understand there might be a slight delay, but it hopefully should not be a problem. Before I invite our speakers to take the floor, I'll just give you a couple of very brief information about how we are going to proceed today. We have a total of about 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we will start with two presentations setting the scene. First from the Commission, DG Energy, on the latest developments regarding coal regions in transition initiative, and then one from Bloomberg New Energy Finance on the latest market developments. So those will be the two scene setters. And then we will switch to the perspective from the regional level, where we will hear three contributions from coal and oil shale regions in Germany, in Estonia, and in Poland. And hopefully at the end, we will also have time for some short question and answers. So, without further ado, I would like now to introduce the first speaker. Many of you will know her already very well. This is Paula Pinho, who is the Director for Just Transition, Consumers, Energy Efficiency and Innovation here in DG Energy in the European Commission. Paula's directorate is in charge of the EU initiative for coal regions in transition. That has been launched by our directorate already in 2017, so now 5 years old. And Paula will give us a short update on the latest developments in this area. So Paula, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hans, and very good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this opening session. We are very pleased to see many of you connected today, and I hope you are all well and coping under the challenging circumstances that we're going through. It's really my pleasure to share a few insights with you on recent EU developments that are of particular interest to you all. Also, looking back at Commissioner Simpson's message that she delivered to you today, I'd like to pick up what she said about the world no longer being the same since we last met in November 2021. A lot has happened indeed, also with an impact on coal in general, on the energy policy, but it does not mean that our objectives, our ultimate objectives, have changed. Quite on the contrary, if anything, they have become even more urgent. So we need to accelerate our efforts to become independent from fossil fuels in general, from imported fossil fuels in particular, and even more so from imports from Russia. And we need to make sure that we also increase our efforts as regards all the mitigation measures on the ground, so as to make sure that it is done in a just, in a fair manner, in an inclusive manner. Now, against the background of the war in Ukraine, a number of measures has been taken, And notably, the EU last month in April proposed a full ban on imports of Russian coal. As we speak, we are discussing a proposal for a full ban on Russian oil. So clearly, this all comes with an impact on our ongoing work, and it means that in the immediate term, we will need to find alternative supplies, alternative suppliers, not always cheap or as cheap, and clearly we will need to roll out renewable energy and energy efficiency at an unprecedented pace, so that really we can cut our reliance on fossil fuels, and therefore we can also reduce our exposure to commodity price fluctuations and the energy supply risks that this all entails. Now, you may ask yourselves whether, with a clear plan to phase out our dependence from Russia, with now a ban on coal imports from this country, whether it's not the moment, to some extent, to actually go back to coal. And I think it's important to clarify this question. No doubt, as a short-term measure, coal may indeed need to step in where gas will be missing, but this cannot and should not change our course of action, where we completely stand by the ultimate objective, which is to decarbonize the energy system, and to do it now even at a faster pace. So let us be very, very clear about that. Now, of course, we're not starting from scratch, and during the past years, we have made tremendous progress as regards the commitments of member states to phase out solid fossil fuels from their energy mix, with the adoption of practically all recovery and resilience plans, and very good progress in the programming of the Just Transition Fund and cohesion policy. We are also unlocking significant resources which will allow us to deliver very concrete projects on the ground and to make the energy transition visible and tangible to the citizens. Now we are starting a new phase of implementation, and we are well aware in the Commission of the challenges that this might create for local actors, for local communities. We know that capacities are limited, and we know that project pipelines are now beginning to be filled with very concrete ideas. So we are also on our side accelerating the efforts to support very concrete action on the ground and to facilitate the exchange of lessons learned that have already been made and from which we can all benefit. And therefore, I would like to give you and share with you some of the progress that we have achieved under our EU initiative for coal regions in transition, starting with a facility we launched last year, which is a specific technical assistance meant to support coal regions design in concrete energy efficiency in clean energy. So this was the target facility. It's delivered by the European Investment Bank, and it's now well up and running. We already received the first applications for support, and I'd really like to encourage you to use this opportunity also in your respective regions. Then, for a broader support on specific topics in the Just Transition context, we will soon launch a new call of our START technical assistance program in the second half of this year. It will again be delivered by the Secretariat of our initiative. And let me give you an example so as to really show that this is very concrete. The Midlands region in Ireland that participated in the previous call, the facility there produced guidance on the process of registration and eligibility criteria for projects in the context of the Just Transition. And based on very good involvement of the stakeholders in the region, this guidance outlines opportunities and emerging economic activities in the rural communities, together with examples of innovative and community-led rural development projects. We've also launched a dedicated so-called live call for coal regions, and this one is meant to help you work on community-driven projects in clean energy. This call is now closed. We are evaluating the applications, and we are really very much looking forward to seeing the first results and making sure to share them with all of you. There's also the new exchange program, NDG Energy, for coal, lignite, peat, and oil shale regions in the EU, the so-called Exchange EU. And this has recently kicked off the first round of exchanges involving 19 regions from 12 member states to share their just transition experiences, and really creating also long-lasting relationships where regional, local public authorities are paired with non-governmental stakeholders ranging from NGOs to regional economic agencies. Then we have a first exchange visit scheduled to take place very soon, in less than 3 weeks, in the Slovenian coal region of Zavazje, and it will receive visitors from the lignite region of northern Hungary and the Czech coal region of Moravia, Silesia. Over the course of the summer, we'll have then other 7 exchanges taking place in hosting regions such as the city of Prievidza in Slovakia, Malopolska in Poland, and Saxony-Anhalt in Germany, and of course many other regions. And then in autumn, we will launch the second call for applications. So you see a lot of activities on the ground going on. And of course, when we look back, COP26 was instrumental to raise awareness of the importance of just transition globally, building also already on the earlier COP. And we now see also internationally growing mobilization, be it in the United States, in South Africa, more widely also in Asia, very specifically in Indonesia, South Korea, India, and Vietnam in particular. And here we can really offer a lot in terms of experience that we've been going through and share with these global partners best practice that we have gathered. Now, the initiative for coal regions in the Western Balkans and Ukraine has been operating until earlier this year. In the Western Balkans, it continues, of course, under the current circumstances in Ukraine. We will need to wait and see, but there are a number of key components of this initiative which have been kickstarted, and now also in particular with the Western Balkans, the Coal Regions Learning Academy, which is supported by the World Bank and the College of Europe, and is aimed at building capacity among local stakeholders on just energy transition topics, the exchange program with these countries, and workshops really aimed at creating common ownership and a fora for exchange of experiences and best practice. So clearly, we believe that there is a role for us collectively to share our experience with the rest of the world. We have therefore developed this new international stream for all the activities of the Secretariat, and we hope that this will help you get the most of the international experience, as well as to share your experience wherever possible and relevant with our counterparts outside the EU. And obviously, in the meantime, we can only support all the transition efforts in the member states and in the EU regions. when we speak of just transition, this can really only happen very concretely on the ground. And I therefore thank you and all the speakers who will be intervening in this session and in these 2 days for sharing their experience from coal, lignite, and peat regions. And we look forward really also to the upcoming events, also from regions, such as the high-level event in a coal region that we organize every year, and that this year will be held in Spain, in Asturias, and where we will also be counting with our commissioner. And of course, we hope that you will be able to join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula, for setting the scene, I think very comprehensively. Indeed, as you said, the world is not the same as it was just maybe half a year ago. And of course, it's not the same either for the coal regions in transition. And I think it was very, very good that you took the time to set out a little bit all the initiatives that are currently going on, and also to map out a little bit what we are sort of seeing for the immediate future. So I think we now have a very good picture of what goes on and the way that we in the Commission see this. And with that, I would like to turn now to Felicia Aminoff. Felicia is an energy transition analyst at Bloomberg New Finance, and she will give us the recent market outlook for renewables and coal phase out. As you know, the market is quite hard to predict at the moment for many, many reasons. And I think it's very good that we have Felicia with us to shed some light on what is going on. I think we are looking very much forward to hearing the perspective more from an economic angle. Now we heard Paula outlining the politics of the coal transition, and now we'll turn to you, Felicia, for the more economic aspects. So Felicia, you have the floor, please.
So I'm a lead analyst at Bloomberg NEF with expertise on Europe's path to net zero and how to phase out coal from power systems. And today I'll be presenting our future energy scenarios for Europe. Historically, Europe's coal regions have played a crucial role in our power systems, but the energy mix is rapidly changing, and the change will only get faster. I hope this will provide a good context for our further discussions about coal closures and just transition. So, next slide, please. So I want to start with appreciating how far we've come in the energy transition compared to just a decade ago. Electricity from new solar and wind plants is now cheaper than electricity from new coal and gas plants on a levelized cost of electricity basis around the globe. Next slide, please. And the European emissions trading system has also proven to be a very effective policy instrument to essentially make it quite unprofitable to run most coal power plants around Europe. Bloomberg NEF now expects that the carbon price will be over 100 euros per ton after 2025. So this, together with the cost of renewables falling, are among the largest drivers for Europe to be able to meet its 2030 target. But economics alone won't quite put us on a net zero path, and I'll explain why by showing you some selected insights from our European energy transition outlook. Next slide, please. And let's move on to one more. So in this outlook, if we can please have the next slide. In this outlook, we created different future energy scenarios. And I'll start by talking about our base case scenario, which we call the economic transition scenario. You can think of this as a business as usual scenario. And this is created by optimizing the cost of the power system. The scenario does include the EU carbon price, but the growth of renewables seen here over the years is mainly a result of favorable renewables economics. The model build is realistic in terms of land availability, but it does not take things as local opposition to wind farms into account. Next, please. Already before 2040, Europe could reach a situation where solar, wind, and batteries can meet up to 80% of power demand over a year. But there will be days when renewables output is too low. And on those days, we need so-called backup generation. In today's power system, that role of backup generation is often fulfilled by gas and coal to some extent. Coal has the highest carbon emission and is most affected by the carbon price. And as Europe builds more renewables over the next decade, coal becomes the first fuel to go. Even if gas is very expensive right now and the market is uncertain, gas prices are expected to stabilize in the long run. And gas power plants are usually better at than coal power plants at quickly ramping up and down to respond to changes in renewables. And power systems do need some backup capacity, even if it's maybe just 10% of generation. And in this economic scenario, there's really no cost-effective alternative to gas. Next slide, please. So to zoom in on coal, we see that a few modern coal power plants can stay as backup capacity in the short term until around 2040 when they're phased out. But after 2030 already, these plants are expected to generate less than 5% of the time. A coal plant that almost never generates, of course, causes very few carbon emissions, but it makes the plants very uneconomical. And after 2040, we expect that Europe has built enough renewables to not need coal plants anymore. But I want to point out that this scenario actually does not meet Europe's climate targets. So let's move on to the next slide to look at our alternative scenario, which is a net zero scenario. So we created this to understand how Europe's energy mix could look if both the EU and UK meet their 2030 and 2050 emissions reduction targets. Here, we can see that hydrogen starts becoming part of the power mix, depicted here in purple. And if we compare the two scenarios, we can see that the net zero scenario actually generates a lot more renewable power. And that's because additional renewables can help decarbonize sectors that currently don't use electricity today. For example, electric vehicles, which replace cars that run on oil. So let's move on to, we can move 2 slides forwards. I'll be talking about 2 key solutions for net zero Europe, which is electrification and hydrogen. So far, I've mainly focused on the power sector, but I want to remind everyone that electricity makes up less than a third of final energy consumption today. In the economic transition scenario, we see that oil is still used in 2050, mainly in the transport sector. In the net zero scenario, electric cars dominate instead. Just to give an example. So rapid electrification of transport, but also heating and industry will help Europe meet its emissions target, but it will also create new electricity demand. So to meet this new demand, we need an even faster build out of renewables generating capacity. Next, please. So looking back at the power sector, in the net zero scenario, coal stops generating completely before 2030. We also see that a new technology, hydrogen, enters, and this can provide that needed backup capacity. So green hydrogen is produced with so-called electrolyzers using renewable electricity to split water molecules, but hydrogen can also be used as a fuel in power plants. And as hydrogen technologies mature, we could see them replacing gas in the power mix. Next, please. But hydrogen production will need more clean electricity to be produced. To the left, we can see how much solar and wind capacity Europe needs to meet existing electricity demand and new demand from electrification. So by 2030, Europe needs to triple its wind and solar capacity to meet its emissions targets. And if we look further in the future and at hydrogen production and assume that Europe would produce most of the green hydrogen used here, this would require additional generation capacity, which could be as much as 1.2 terawatts dedicated only to hydrogen production in 2050. Next, please. With this much renewables built, me and my colleagues started wondering if land availability would be an issue. I'm happy to tell you that there is enough land available, but there are still some challenges to overcome. Europe could end up using more than 2% of land for onshore renewables. And this is a bit more than land used for roads in Europe today. One challenge that needs to be solved is, for example, around social acceptance of wind farms, but offshore wind could also play a larger role to mitigate this. Next slide, please. So I want to finish on a positive note by telling you that the investment needed to reach net zero and the 2030 target is entirely feasible. And this could also contribute to a just transition. To get on a net zero path, Europe needs around 130 billion euros per year to be invested in renewable energy and hydrogen production. That's around 0.7% of last year's GDP, and a similar amount to what governments invest in roads. However, even stronger policy signals are needed to ramp up renewables investment to get on the net zero path. And policy will also be crucial to ensure that this investment can contribute to a just transition. Thank you.
There's a very interesting overview of the market situation and the economics of the energy transition. I think your analysis corresponds quite well with what we in the Commission have been doing, and for example, what we did with the climate target plan that also basically came to the same conclusions, that it is feasible to arrive at carbon neutrality by 2050, and in fact that the costs are reasonable and that overall the benefits outweigh whatever costs there might be. So I think very, very interesting to hear your analysis there, and also that you placed, I think, very well the issues related to coal and other fossil fuels in that picture, and how they, in the run-up to 2050, what role one could expect from those sources of energy. So I think very, very good. We now have set the scene both for the from the political perspective and from the economic perspective, and now I think it will be very interesting to hear from the regions that are affected by many of these developments. And I would like first to pass the floor to Jörg Steinbach, who is Minister for Economy, Labor and Energy of Brandenburg in Germany. Mr. Steinbach is a chemical engineer by training and a former president of the Technical University in Cottbus, as I understand it. So he's absolutely the right man to talk to us here today and tell us about his experience on the ground and maybe share a few insights on the latest state of play and how to unlock new opportunities for the region that you are representing. So Jörg Steinbach, the floor is yours, and if you can keep your remarks to not much more than 10 minutes, and I think we will also have a little bit of time for a discussion at the end. Please, Jörg, you have the floor.
First of all, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I always hate this if the moderators rise the barriers to meet very high with the introduction, but I will try to do my very best. What I would like to outline is very briefly the starting point for our transition, the way we decided to go, and to share with you some first experiences, and then perhaps to have one final remark also with respect to the contribution we just did here. In telegram style, there are 13,000 industrial workplaces at stake in that region due to the phase out of lignite coal. We have a big psychological problem because people living there regard this as a repetition of a structural disruption which happened in 1990 after the reunification. Perhaps to give you a brief idea what that means, we actually are able to show that we had a reduction in CO2 emission by more than 20% between 1990 and 2000, but these were not due to any political or industrial activities. They were just a loss of industry. So that more or less fall into our lap without our personal doing. But the people still do remember the time because they lost a lot of workplaces. They lost a lot of young people who actually left the area for Western Germany, and they are pretty much afraid that this transition we are facing now may call for a repetition of that experience. Last but not least, this is an area of, let's say, limited infrastructure, let me put it that way. Reason is very simple. The power plant uses transmission lines to send the product everywhere, so they don't need roads, they don't need railways, but any substitution by any other industrial activity will need this kind of infrastructure. So we have to put a lot of effort also into the infrastructure to make the area attractive for future settlements. The way we decide to go, or in the first step, to lean on existing settlements. We have 2 to 3 larger players in that region. One to name, but it's not a big secret, is the BASF. And we convinced them to extend actually their product portfolio that way, to extend their industrial activities and to hire more people so that there can be a kind of change from the electrical power plant people and the coal mining people to this production plant. That is possible for those working in a power plant, but is hardly an alternative for those who are actually working in the field of mining. We put some confidence in the existing university, which you mentioned, and also in the field of science. And what we actually did was to start what we do call the Lucitia Science Park, an area close to the city of Cottbus, which shall be developed in a way that it should become attractive for additional settlements, and also especially looking for settlements which could interact with the university, attract external research organizations, and that way form a new nucleus which then could multiply into the region. And last but not least, we are looking for new industrial activities in the region. We were able to convince Rolls-Royce to join our efforts and to place the complete development of hybrid electric aviation to this area. So we are trying to rely on new technologies, on those which have an outreach of, let's say, more than 10 to 15 years, so that whatever we do there represents also a certain amount of sustainability. What are the first experiences which can be mentioned? I think the biggest aha effect for all of us was to realize that there is a tremendous field of tension between bottom-up activities and top-down activities. So the people living there, the communes, they want to get involved, they want to be a player in that field. Nonetheless, and this is not a true criticism as such, but the idea is they do have they're not going to look for the big enterprises for new industrial placings and on that level. So they try to extend their activities or to approach new areas of activities, but on a basis that the people living there have a feeling that they are part of the transition process. Just to rely on that would actually be too slow for what we have to accomplish. And so we also decided to introduce some top-down activities. And one example was actually very prominent today, because today it was not the cornerstone, it was the first spade into the sand to build a new site for the maintenance of modern electrical trains. This is going to be a workshop which will host approximately 1,200 new workplaces on the industrial level, so on the blue color level, and perhaps 10% of it on the white color level. So that was more or less imposed on the region from us, from the governmental side. And we are also looking into other activities which would accelerate that process. And there we do learn that there is still a lot of hesitation, a lot of skepticism, whether these things which we more or less impose on the region will have the effect which is necessary really to have this transition to become successful. And on the other side, we feel that the other activities are a little bit too small or too slow. And to overcome that psychological barrier is perhaps something where we are about to learn how to do it, but I would not claim that we have identified the golden pathway yet. It's still something on a big learning curve. With respect to the bottom-up activities, we do accompany them with a so-called workshop structure on different activities. They do reach from industrial ones, from digitalization ones, from infrastructure ones to culture ones. We decided also to put an emphasis on the culture development on the region, because we have the feeling that this may perhaps lead faster to a personal identification with the transition process. So all the communes have the chance to submit their project to these workshops. There they are challenged. There are questions for effectivity, for sustainability. And if they pass that kind of a challenging process, then they are moved up to the political level of our government, and there we decide or give the final green light that money should go into it, or that they should refocus, or whatever the response can be. And another experience is to keep the number of organizations involved within a streamlined process. We have reasonable active unions want to play a major part of it, especially focusing on what we call good labor, so that there are tariff contracts, that there are lots of activities accompanying the working environment, so that it is a good working environment. We have chambers who do represent the small and medium-sized enterprises of the region, and to put a focus on their development, especially in the field of digitalization, to make them competitive for the future. And each one of them are a little bit doing these kind of efforts on top of those activities which have been introduced from the governmental side. And you have to put a lot of effort into it, that these parallel activities finally do fit into a joint process and are streamlined that way and gain on effectivity. So let me sum it up, and I think 1 minute late. Last but not least, my big hope is that the JTF program will have a very special focus on the small and medium-sized enterprises. This is the kind of character our industry is set up, and so to have the best development in the region is to strengthen these small, medium-sized enterprises and to support them financially. So we are definitely looking forward that this JTF program is going to start. So I think that was 11 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jack. I thought that was very interesting. I'm sorry if I sort of raised expectations for your intervention, but I think it was fully the right thing to do, because I think what you said was so interesting, actually. And I really think what you said about the bottom up and the top down approaches and how to get these things to sort of fit together into what needs to happen in the region is really, really important. And I was encouraged to hear that you have the overall impression that people really want to be involved. They want to be part of this transition. And I think it's very important that we offer them the opportunities to be so, because I think without that, we're not going to be successful. So thank you very much for that, and hope we will come back to you maybe during the Q&A session. But for now, we would go to Mr. Hardi Murula. He is representing the Association of Local Authorities in the Ida-Viru County in Estonia. And that, for those of you who are familiar with the Estonian geography, knows that this is where we have the oil-shale region of Estonia. And we are looking forward, Hardi, to hear your experiences, because, of course, this is not just about coal. This is also about other types of fossil fuels for which there is limited role as we move forward towards the middle of the century. So, Hardi, please, you have the floor. Please.
And greetings from Ida-Viru region, which is unique and only region in Europe where the oil shale is used. And it's good to be part of the Coal Plus cooperation and not left behind, because we are not, the oil shale industry is not the same as the coal industry, but the challenges and other issues are similar. So I will give you some quick thoughts about our plans and challenges we have. Please, next slide. Okay, this is Estonian climate goals and the roadmap where how we can achieve climate neutrality. Already in 2012, we fulfilled renewable energy targets for 2020. And next big goal is to reduce our greenhouse gases by 70% by 2030. It's achievable also because already in 2019 we had reduce of greenhouse gases more than 60%. And 2 years ago, our new government agreed in coalition agreement that we will end oil shale based electricity production latest 2035 and will end use oil shale as a resource for energy in 2040. And that will help us to achieve our climate neutrality. Actually, Estonian Energy Company, who is the biggest Estonian energy company and only one who uses oil shale for electricity production in direct burning, has declared that they will end using of oil shale for electricity production already in 2013. So it will be even fast. Next slide, please. So far in Estonia, we have done quite well. Our GDP has risen and our greenhouse gases are dropped, but still compared with other European countries, our footprint, carbon footprint is according to population and according to our GDP is very high. Next slide, please. Okay. As moderator already said, we are Ida-Viru is geographically northeast of Estonia. We have a population which is compared with 10% of Estonian total populations. And our biggest challenges are right down here, that our economy is deeply depends on the oil shale sector. Our unemployment rate is higher than Estonian average. And also the relative poverty is higher than Estonian average. And besides, our region is having only less than 20% of population or residents who mother language is Estonian. So it's in that case also we are not very easy region. And you can see from the map the scars of the excavating oil shale already more than 100 years. You can see from the space, and approximately right now more than 15% of our county's territory has been excavated. Next slide, please. That's how the oil shale looks like in structure. So it's rather nice, but it's basically the same hydrocarbonate material you can get from the earth, and you can use it as a resource for burning, but also if you treat it thermically, the result will be shale oil or shale gas. So it's that's why our region is a little bit different from the coal regions, that right now most of the oil shale we are using in shale oil production and less already in electricity production. Next slide, please. And actually, before the next slide will be that the oil shale is not unique in Estonia. It's very wide mineral resource, and actually the start of using oil shale in industrial scale started in France in 1860s. But the peak of oil shale has been in 1918s. Next slide, please. It describes that. Okay, now see that the peak is already happened in next century, and now it's decreasing. Next slide, please. And the transition is ongoing process for us, because the first phase of the transition and the hardest and the biggest one happened after the Soviet occupation, of course. And since that, we also had the second phase of transition. It was before Estonia joined the European Union, and we adopted all the necessary environmental regulations. And that was the second phase of the transition. And right now we are entering or already having the third phase of transition in the oil shale sector. And as you can see from the graph that the number of the jobs are increasing constantly. Next slide, please. And unfortunately, if the jobs are disappeared, also the population will drop down, as you can see from the. We have lost since the end of Soviet era. We have lost more than 40% of our population. Next slide, please. And now about our transition plans. My colleague Ivan Sergeyev from Ministry of Finance gave you a longer view about our transition process building last April, where the seminars took place. And just very briefly, that we have decided that to compile a just transition territorial plan, we are not going to have a separate strategic process, but we involved that process to the renewing Ida-Viru County Development Strategy, and which is regional strategy, and the state strategy we have is Ida-Viru Action Plan. And right now our territorial plan is on the informal inter-service, and we are making some corrections and hope that our plans will be confirmed very soon. Next slide, please. And this is basically the general overview of how a transition. As you saw earlier, that we need very fast relief because we already had two transition phases with no support or intervention measures, and we have very high unemployment. That's why we are focusing that we need new jobs, and that's why main target of our transition plan is to how we can attract investors and offer them grants for creating jobs. But this is the fast relief, but also we are looking for more long-term changes, because the main issue we are looking for a transition process that we want to build up proper science network in our region, to build up high value industries and job places which will be sustainable, not next 10 years, but maybe not next 20 and more years. This is will be the biggest challenge for us to build up that network. We don't have that so much funds to build up centers of competence or excellence of science, but we want to build up proper network that will help us solve all necessary problem according to transitions. And also other relative issues should be solved during the transition process according to the social care and local governments and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the slide about my possible concerns, but as I already over my time, I'm not going to be so worried about the transition process, but I want to point it out just 3 issues quickly, that just transition can't be done without green energy transition first, because as we know that the scope or the key of the European Green Deal is the electrification and renewables, but if we don't have them, there will be no just transition as well. And my Czech colleague already mentioned in the opening session that the timetable for using the just transition money is very fast, and we already has been spent almost 1 year of that possible using of that money, and to use 70% of that money by the end of 2023 6 is it's quite challenging because the transition is not 100 meters or not even 400 meters. It's more like marathon. So it's if we try to go for so fast in the first phase, we are not going to end that journey. And it's more about us that for that managing and steering and analyzing that transition process, it's need very good capacity, and we are just building up yet. Next slide, please. I don't want to end with that worrying issues, but to show you some good examples of transition already. On the right, you can see the formal mine, which is now operating as Estonian Mining Museum. On the left down, you can see formal semi-coke hill and waste area, which is now used as a sky slope and adventure sports center. And left top, you can see the formal open mine, which is now under development into the water sports center. And in that mining museum, it's very very realistic because after the mine stopped working, they keep it as it was. And now some of the formal miners are working as guides over there. And the Adventure Sports Center is giving very good possibilities for our youngsters to have that kind of jobs they are looking for to be part of that. And hope that that kind of examples will be more in the nearest future. And thank you, and hoping that the transition process will be nice and smooth and soft as the Estonian nature described in the picture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hardy. Also, thank you for ending on a positive and optimistic note. I mean, of course, there are many challenges involved, and I think you described many of them. And you also said that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I entirely agree. It's, however, a marathon where the pace from the beginning is quite high. So it's a tough marathon as well. But thank you very much for your remarks. I think they were very, very valid. I understand that there was some issues with the interpretation earlier on, but they have now been solved. So I'm very happy now to be able to introduce Maciek Sestek. He is the representative of the management board of the Wielkopolska region for the restructuring of the Wielkopolska Woźnotnia. And that's probably not a good pronunciation, but I'm sorry for that. But he's the president of the management board of the Regional Development Agency in Konin, and he's joining us from Poland today. And we are interested to hear your views, Maciek, because I think Poland, obviously, as we also saw in some of the earlier slides, is a country that has serious challenges. But I understand that your region is actually looking at becoming climate neutral already by 2040. And maybe you can confirm that to us, but that sounds very good. But of course, we're very interested in your presentation. So please, Maciek, I think you can go ahead. And for those who want to listen, you will need now to tune in on the app if you want to listen in English at least. Maciek, please.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your kind invitation to this panel, and I'm really happy that I can participate in it, and I'm really glad that we have interpretation. Otherwise, you would have to be exposed to my English. But moving on to the essence of my presentation. What is important in the case of Eastern Wielkopolska, which is located in the center of Poland, is that it set very ambitious goals for itself. When I was looking at the first presentation and there was no Poland in it, I was saddened by that fact when we were talking about phasing out coal. But Poland has set very ambitious goals for itself. And in 2030, we want to stop producing coal and burning it for electricity in the power plant. That's the main goal. In 2040, in our sub-region, we want to be climate neutral. So these two dates are very important for us, 2030 and 2040. This will result in the fact that we will reduce CO2 emissions by more than 90%, by 95%. And what's happening today? And there are many reasons for that, global reasons as well as local ones. It may turn out that phasing out of coal will happen even earlier in 2028. Our biggest producer, ZEPAC company, announced that it may stop producing coal in 2024 even. That's a very big acceleration, and this puts us in a situation of huge challenges that we have in front of us, especially when it comes to the labor market. The labor market right now is the most important one. We have several thousand people who will have to be re-skilled, re-qualified, and they will have to find new jobs. So this is the main objective that we are focusing on. And now, what we think is really important in our activity is most of all collaboration with all partners, NGOs, trade unions, above all, business, local governments. This is of utmost importance for us, and we are working on it. We want dialogue to be happening. Even though we completed just transition plan and submitted it to the European Commission alongside a regional program, we are still carrying out communication activities. We are communicating with stakeholders, telling them what we've been doing, because only through dialogue are we able to do this. So we submitted the program and the transformation plan, and we also implement different activities like public hearings concerning strategy. Apart from transition plan, which is a short-term or mid-term goal until 2040, we are working on climate neutrality strategy for our region, Eastern Wielkopolska region. And its aim is to make sure that in 2040 we can be climate neutral. So these are activities that we do on a continuous basis. And what is very important for us when it comes to the future perspective and also the current perspective, well, right now, investments are the most important in our region. We are looking forward for funds from Just Transition Fund, but at the same time, we are implementing a lot of measures which are aimed at changing our region already today. One of the basic elements is that ZEPAC company, which is at the same time the one who produces coal and runs the power plant, it changed its strategy to a green strategy. As a result, in our region, apart from ZEPAC company, we have other businesses which decided to operate in this area. Right now, in our regions, we have 3 geothermal projects which are worth more than 40 million euros, operated in 3 biggest centers in the city of Konin, Kołów, and Tuwek. And also, we have one of the biggest photovoltaic farms in Poland, organized by ZEPAC company. It's more than 100 hectares. On top of that, we have several wind projects already in the pipeline. And what is very important to us is that we have 3 basic smart specializations. One of them includes renewable energy sources. And I've already mentioned that photovoltaic and wind farms, which are to replace the reduced capacity from conventional coal. But one of the most important smart specializations is focusing on water, if I heard correctly. Several years ago, when we started working, focusing, sorry, on hydrogen. Several years ago, when we started working on it, people were smiling. But now ZEPAC is manufacturing hydrogen. It bought electrolyzer, and the city of Konin already has the first hydrogen-powered bus that will be used in Konin. And all these measures are not big-scale measures, maybe, but dozens of millions of euros are being invested in undertakings and projects of different kinds. And investments. Apart from that, in the region of Wielkopolska, because of the fact that the Just Transition Fund is not yet available we use the old financial perspective to support employees from ZEPAC companies, to make sure that layoffs of employees, because they are already being laid off, and once all measures are closed in 2024, the activity of that company is closed in 2024, it may turn out that we will have several thousand people who will be intensively looking for a job. So on the one hand, we need to create jobs, but on the other hand, we need to offer people possibility of reskilling. So we have €1 million funds to support those people to requalify and to find a new job. And of course, we also use funds from the previous financial perspective, and we finance measures related to umbrella projects to support development of photovoltaic, benefiting the citizens, support for photovoltaic and different energy measures for public institutions. So there are many more measures. We have a lot of investors. This is a huge territory on which we try to attract investors, making sure that they create new jobs. Just Transition Fund, of course, is something that's really very good. But from our perspective, unless business creates new jobs, it will be really hard for us to change this region. And what is the most important, what we think is incredibly important in Eastern Wielkopolska, is that apart from creating jobs, we want to create a new identity for the region. This region has a coal mining identity, and it's related to some very important things like tradition, respect for work of coal miners. At the same time, people in the region were perceived as people who are working for the region, for the country, generating an added value. And now we need a new approach. We need to create for them not only jobs, but also reason to be proud of that region. So we try to have a comprehensive approach to the whole project. And we also undertook a big challenge against the backdrop of Poland, of course. Compared to Europe, it's not so big, but in Poland, 2040, climate neutrality is a huge challenge. But I think we are able to cope with that. On the one hand,
it's a huge challenge because on one hand we can support our greatest employer that wants to transform and is planning to transform and has already announced its strategy, but we still need to focus on small and medium enterprises. I'm a bit jealous for my colleagues in Germany. Minister Steinbach has presented that very well. I was in the region recently, and when I've heard that the government of Germany dedicated 40 billion euro to support the mining industry, I felt sad because in Poland it's 400 million only. On the other hand, we think that the fund for just transformation and other funds can give us some sway some empowerment. We are not waiting only for the Just Transformation Fund. We have applied to LIFE program for 18 million euro that could help us to transform the region. We are working very hard together with the World Bank to develop employee program to provide the environment of support for the miners. So those things are happening right now, and we are looking very much forward to receive funds for the Just Transformation Fund. I'm in line with the previous speaker from Estonia, and spending all those funds will be a huge challenge because it's not about spending everything fast, but about spending them all in a justified and good way. Thank you very much for this presentation, and I'm really glad I could use the interpretation, and hopefully my speech was more understandable. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Maciek. I think the translation worked very well, at least until the very end when I was trying to switch from one system to the other, and it sounded as if there was a bit of an echo, but at least for me here, your messages came through loud and clear. So thank you also very much to the interpreters, and thank you, I think, Maciek, for really mentioning some of the key issues here that this is all about. And I think one of the things that I heard you say was that, you know, the investments into your region are so important. And I think that is absolutely true. It is about making sure that there is an attractiveness for investments into new opportunities. And I think you mentioned geothermal projects, photovoltaic farms, hydrogen as a new area of opportunities. And I think all of these are really areas where, you know, you can create a new identity also for the region, and of course also help with the energy transition as such. So I think that is really, really important. And I think the things you said about, you know, the identity of the region and the people who live in the region is so important to take into consideration as well. I mean, and that also goes back to some of the things that we heard in earlier interventions, that you need to make sure that the people who are affected by this are on board and are supporting the transition, because otherwise it's going to be much more difficult and much harder and much more less likely to be successful. So I think that was a very interesting intervention there, Maciek, so thank you very much for that. And this is now the moment where we should normally have Q&A, but I'm afraid that we've actually used all our time. But I also see that some of the questions that came in on the chat, I think, have been responded. I think, for example, Maciek responded to the question about the energy transition in Poland and the timing for that. So we may actually see, although there hasn't been a formal date set for Poland as such for energy or coal, shall we say, phase out, that we may actually see that sooner than some people would expect, and certainly before 2050, which is, I think, a very, very good thing. I think for me, what remains to be said is to, of course, thank our speakers. All of you, I think, have really contributed enormously to a better understanding of both where we are and some of the challenges that we are facing here. So thank you very much to all of you. We will, of course, this is only the beginning. There will be further sessions in tomorrow where we will come back to some of these issues as well, maybe from slightly different angles. I think I will come back also in a session that will focus more on the international aspects of that. But there will be many opportunities to continue the discussion. So if the audience have further questions, I think you can put them into the chat still. And I think also the people behind the screens will be able to pick up on them and maybe come back to them in a different way later on. You also see here on the screen a request for you to fill in the feedback survey. Paula, at the very beginning, mentioned the meeting in Oviedo in the Asturias in Spain. on the 7th of July, and I hope many of you will be able to attend that meeting. It will be a physical meeting, as I understand it, which is, of course, a very nice thing. So with that, I would like again to thank the speakers. I would also like to thank the audience and also those of you who have been active and posing questions. I apologize again for not having time to actually have a Q&A session, but we'll see what we can do in terms of coming back to your questions as needed. And I wish you all a very nice rest of the day and a productive ongoing virtual week, hopefully together with us here in further sessions during this event. So thank you very much indeed, and goodbye from me for now. Thank you very much.